Coming up, a gossipy history of English country houses.
A coming of age in 1980s New York.
Plus our distraction of the week. I'm Mel.
I'm Dave. This is the Library of Lost Time. So before we get started, we should talk about the weekend in Wales.
We should.
If you missed last week's episode, we announced that we are taking over a manor house in Wales in October, and we invited everybody to come along with us.
Because we would really love it if everybody could come.
That would be fantastic. Unfortunately, there are a limited number of beds, which is going to make that pretty awkward if an infinite number of people show up.
How cool would it be, though, if it was a magical country house where there were just enough beds for everybody, but also still felt cozy?
That'd be great.
That would be so cool.
Yeah. Sadly, that's not the world we live in.
No, our house has 10 bedrooms.
It has 10 bedrooms. So we announced that we were going to put tickets on sale for our patrons this week, and then we were going to open it up to everybody today.
Yeah.
Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And then we opened it up to our patrons.
On Tuesday,
and we sold out in 8 minutes.
It was pretty shocking.
I was thinking a week or two.
While we were developing this idea, I had a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't sure if people would want to come.
Yeah.
And I was comforting myself by thinking, well, it's 10 months until October. Surely we can sell those spots between now and, say, the summer.
Right. So we sold out, and we had sort of two emotions simultaneously, one of which was just delight, like, thank you so much for doing this, for taking a chance on two people who most of you have never met. And second, we felt empathy for people who wanted to get tickets but were unable.
So we started a waiting list for people who are interested in the potential of doing this again in the future. If we have enough interest, and if things go smoothly in October 2025, I suspect we will do it again.
Yeah.
So we'll put a link in the show notes. So if you are one of the people who's interested, you can sign up for the waiting list.
Or you can sign up for our Substack, and we'll keep you in the loop on everything that we are going to do. So are you ready to talk about books?
I am. Since the beginning of the year, this is probably not going to surprise anybody based on what we were just talking about.
Right.
Since the beginning of the year, I've been devouring all the Manor House books I can get my hands on. And last week, I listened to an episode of my favorite nerdy podcast, History Extra. Their guest was Adrian Tinniswood. First, that name, Adrian Tinniswood.
Is he a scholar?
He is.
He sounds like a scholar.
He is a professor at the University of Buckingham, where he runs a program for postgraduate degrees in country house studies.
I feel like that's very exciting to you, and you are projecting excitement. And for others, maybe a little less exciting.
The master's course is called From Hampton Court to Downton Abbey. Come on.
Yeah, sure. Who wouldn't want to hang out for all 40 hours of that in the symposium and the lecture and the teacher's notes?
You know what, Dave? No scones for you. No scones. No little finger sandwiches.
I like scones.
No. I'm not going to steep your tea long enough, and you only get one sugar cube instead of two. Anyway.
Yeah.
My pretend friend, Adrian Tinniswood,
is
the author of 18 books on social history and architecture. His latest is the third in a trilogy that explores the country house life during different eras. The new one is about pre-World War I. It's called The Power and the Glory, Life in the English Country House Before the Great War.
And you immediately picked it up?
Of course I did.
Yeah.
He was very charming on the podcast. We'll get to that in a minute. The book delves into the history and customs of the British country house between 1870 and 1914. So that's the end of the Victorian era. He covers all aspects of life, including hunting parties, servants, the gardens, and the impact of modern conveniences like cars and electricity. Electricity was a very big deal.
Sure.
And he's an engaging storyteller and drops outrageous facts into his stories. For example, during this era, it wasn't unusual at a big house for the staff to wash, dry, and fold 1,800 pieces of linen per week.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And some of the country house owners didn't want to get electricity because it would power machinery that would do some of the jobs. And they thought, well, why do we need that? We have servants to do it.
Mm.
Yeah. And Tinniswood does a really good job talking about that stuff, like kind of sharing his eyebrow raise at that kind of thought while also sharing the information.
Yeah.
He is also not afraid to get gossipy and tell tales about posh people's shenanigans. He shared a really fun story about a revered British architect. His name was Richard Norman Shaw, and he designed dozens of Victorian buildings, including schools, churches, townhouses, and country homes. He built the kind of manors that have names instead of addresses,
Oh, yeah.
like Cragside and Whispers. That guy Shaw was also the master of the hustle. According to the story, he would wear dress shirts with extra long sleeves. And if he found himself sitting next to a wealthy man at a dinner party, he would pull his sleeve out below his jacket and use it to sketch a design right onto his shirt cuff. And by the time the cigars and port were done, he'd have convinced his new acquaintance that he needed a new manor house.
That's quite a scam he's got going there.
It's ingenious. The whole book is a mix of solid history and delightful scuttlebutt. I also learned that there were two types of country house thieves. Dinner thieves struck while everyone was in the dining room. The thieves would use a ladder outside the manor to climb into the bedrooms and help themselves to jewelry and cash.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. And the first sleep thieves hit the house right after guests had gone to bed because it was assumed that's when everyone was sleeping at their deepest, most soundest.
Yeah.
If you would like to know more about the world of Downton Abbey and Gosford Park, this book is a delicious way to learn it. It's The Power and the Glory, Life in the English Country House Before the Great War by Adrian Tinniswood. And I'll put the titles and links to his other country house books in the show notes.
Adam Ross is an author whose first novel was called Mr. Peanut. That came out in 2010. It was a notable book for the New York Times that year, and it was declared one of the best books of the year by the New Yorker and the Philadelphia Inquirer and a few others. Presumably for the last 15 years, he's been working on his second novel. Ross has done public readings from this manuscript for the last decade.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of cool that people got to hear sneak peeks, but also
It's a while.
that's a long time.
Yeah. The book finally came out this month. It's called Playworld. I first became aware of this because Ron Charles of the Washington Post wrote a glowing review. Charles wrote, quote, "Starting 2025 with a novel this terrific gives me hope for the whole year."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And I trust Ron. He's an imaginary friend of mine. He and Bruce and Barack and I have a couple of imaginary beers from time to time. And if Ron says a book is great, I am going to read a few pages. So I'm going to tell you the premise. If you're like me, the premise will not necessarily grab you. It's a coming-of-age story. The protagonist is a 14-year-old boy growing up in New York City. He is a child actor in an artistic family, and the whole book covers a year in his life, which, I'm not against it.
Sure.
But it also wasn't like, get out of my way, I need to read this now.
Yep.
And then I read the first paragraph, and that says, in the fall of 1980, when I was 14, a friend of my parents named Naomi Shaw fell in love with me. She was 36, a mother of two, and married to a wealthy man. Like so many things that happened to me that year, it didn't seem strange at the time. And in the next paragraph, he says that 2 decades later, he told his mom about that relationship, and his mom's response was, "But she was such an ugly woman."
Inappropriate on so many levels.
So I was 15 in 1980, and I don't know what 15 is like now. I suspect not overly awesome, but I can speak to then. My own adolescence was spent bouncing back and forth between adults who had abdicated their responsibilities for raising children and adults who we would describe today as predatory, but back then they were just adults.
Right.
And it wasn't just me, right? I went to school with a bunch of kids who were in that same situation. There's a surprising number. We had a support group. It was a thing. I hope it was a symptom of that particular time when the boomer generation was going through their greed is good and their me generation, and divorce felt rampant. But it did feel normal because, of course, it did, right? We were 15 and nothing else had ever happened to us.
Right.
And that's what growing up is like. And as I got older, I was like, oh, wait a second. That was abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got it. Caught up now. There is another aspect of that paragraph which carries through the whole book. The narrator tells the story from an older age. The overall effect is that it feels like somebody is recounting their youth. And he has since laid down his anger and forgiven his transgressors. And there's hope in this book, in part because the narrator exists as an older, wiser person.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bit in this book where the main character is talking to his therapist, and the therapist says, so maybe that's what you've been put on Earth for, to come up with a language for your life. And it feels like this book is the ultimate conclusion of that exercise, right? That Ross has written a language for his life, or at least this part of it. So, if you weren't an adolescent in the early 80s, is this book still worth reading? Absolutely. The writing is fantastic, particularly on the sentence level. The details Ross catches and how he writes about them are just top-tier storytelling. The characters ring true. The novel's about growing up with a strong sense of New York City and the 80s. The author's life closely parallels the main characters. There's what feels like veracity. Like his main character, the author, Ross was a child actor in New York City in the 80s. I suspect this is an autobiography shaded just a little into literary fiction. If you're interested in any of that, you will enjoy this. But if you're Gen X, or if you were under the roof of adults who were more self-involved than they should have been, this book will resonate. It just came out 2 weeks ago. It's Playworld by Adam Ross.
And now, our distraction of the week. Hit it, Timmy.
Here's a fun fact. Most novels are about 90,000 words.
Yeah.
And that breaks down to around 360 pages or so, depending on the book's design. I myself love a big old cinder block of a book.
Yes, you seem attracted to big doorstops.
Yes. So my preference is somewhere between 500 and 600 pages.
Yeah.
I think of that as the Jane Eyre length. Long enough to spend plenty of time getting to know the characters, but not so long it's intimidating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I've also read a few chonkers that completely changed my worldview on what the words long book mean. In 2017, I read Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon. It's about 930 pages. I don't know what made me pick that book up, because it's not really, if you described it, it would not sound like something I would read.
Yeah.
I don't know how I ended up reading that book.
Yeah. You've read a few Stephenson books, and I'm always a little surprised, because that seems like so squarely my thing and so squarely not your thing.
But I don't think you recommended it to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, Cryptonomicon is a huge adventure tale. It has history and romance and action. Alan Turing makes an appearance. There's gold, greed, tests of loyalty, Nazis. There's a lot.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of action. But he also has really compelling character development. And the collision of those two things is fantastic and kept me going for those 900 plus pages. But even more, it showed me that I could very happily devour massive books.
Yeah.
And that has been so much fun to see that a book is 1,500 pages and be like, oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, let's do it.
I know how to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you all of this now because I am 6% into another epic. It's called The Wheel of Fortune. It's a family saga by Susan Howich that came out in 1984. It tells the story of the Godwin family and their manor house in Wales from 1914 through the 1960s. Each section is narrated by a different character, and so far, it's a delight. There's lots of gossiping and talking about whether or not people are the right kind of people and jilted lovers. Plus, the manor house is called Oxmoon.
Your face kind of softened when you said Oxmoon.
Oxmoon is a character in this thing. I love it. Anyway, I thought I would share 5 tips for reading longer books in case you want to tackle a cinder block too.
Okay, great.
Number 1, choose wisely. A doorstopper might make you think of classics like Middlemarch or Great Expectations, and those can be challenging to get through 1,000 pages of 19th century literary prose.
Yes.
But there are lots of hefty books with the plotting and pacing of a shorter book, even though they're long. They're kind of like a trilogy that's been published in one volume instead of 3 separate books.
Right.
Cryptonomicon was very much like that. Number 2, and this is the big one. Like, if you only take away one thing from this, this is the one. Reset your expectations. As modern story consumers, we're conditioned to expect stories to unfold at a predictable pace. Most TV dramas and sitcoms, movies, books use the 3-act structure.
Yeah, so in that 3-act structure, that first act is usually every day we were doing this, right? It sets up the normal. And then act 2 is the tilt. And act 3 is sort of what we did about it and how it affected all of us. If you're reading an 1,100-page book, act 1 might be 400 pages long.
Exactly.
Which is a long, long time to read about. Nothing really happened
Set
until.
up, basically, yeah. When you're watching a TV show or reading a 350-page book, you can kind of feel when the shift to the next part is going to happen.
Yeah.
In a longer novel, that stretches way out.
Yep.
So you kind of have to adjust your expectations a little bit. It always helps me to slow down and just give myself over to the way the story is unfolding and kind of ride the tide for a little while.
Yeah.
And I have a corollary to number 2. Let's call it 2.1. When you start reading a longer novel, it helps if you give yourself more reading time at that first sitting to really get into it. So like try to devour a chunk, like maybe 50 pages or 100 pages to really get into it. It's not like when you're reading a 350-page book and you can read like 5 pages and you're in it.
Right. Yeah.
Number 3, make a list of the characters. Because I read on the Kindle most of the time, I make a character list in the Notes app on my phone. As new characters are introduced, I jot down a couple things to help me remember who they are and their relationships to each other. And I also do a mental casting and assign celebrities or people I know to each character so I can kind of visualize their faces. I would be super embarrassed if anybody saw my notes. There are typos and my own weird shorthand for how I describe the characters.
Yeah.
These are just for me never to see the light of day.
Right.
But the act of making those notes does 2 things. The like physical pause to step away from the narrative for a second and jot down some ideas cements it in my mind better. So I'm not just like drifting along in the story.
Yeah.
And sometimes in these really long books, a character like disappears on page 274.
Right.
And then on 583, they're back.
Yeah.
Having the list of characters helps me remember who's who.
Yeah. I take that idea and I go farther with that. I use GoodNotes on my iPad to keep track of my reading. I have character names. I have a little description of who they are. I will frequently go out and get pictures of actors and place them next to or on the same page. I have a column for like, sometimes it's locations or ideas or themes that seem to be reoccurring in the story. I really have gotten, I don't want to call it a crutch, but I've really gotten used to using my iPad as a note-taking device for reading, and it pays off. It makes it way easier to track and keep going, as you say, in a longer book or even in a shorter book or tracking a murder mystery, any of that stuff. If it's more than 3 characters, I write it down. Yeah,
that stuff is really helpful when you're doing like an Agatha Christie style closed circle of suspects murder mystery.
Or even like a large family historical novel or something like that. It's just nice to be able to not have to flip back in the pages and remember whose grandmother is this and what was that relationship again and that kind of thing. I also group characters together in families in my notes so that I remember that this character introduced me to these 3 characters, that kind of thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Tip number 4.
Yep.
Try an e-reader.
Yes.
I read the Wolf Hall trilogy, Carlos Ruiz Zafón's The Labyrinth of the Spirits, and Plain Bad Heroines on my Kindle. They are all well north of 500 pages each. And when I saw those books on the shelves at a bookshop, I was like, what? Literally looked like a cinder block.
Yeah.
They're massive and heavy and kind of unwieldy.
Yeah.
And I like to read in bed.
Yeah.
I mean, I put my Kindle next to me on its little tripod stand and lie on my side. I don't even hold the Kindle. So the idea of holding a big book is
not going to work out.
Not going to work for me.
Yeah.
The other nice thing about having your books on an e-reader is that it's very portable. Everybody knows the number one tip for answering the question, how can I read more, is to read wherever you are.
Yeah.
So you're in line at the bank, you're waiting for your kids to finish their swimming lessons.
Right. Doctor's appointment, mass transit, flights, any of that.
Much easier to have your slim e-reader than a 4-inch thick book.
Yeah.
And finally, tip number 5, mix in other reading. For me, the great gift of a very long book is that I get to spend a lot of time in a particular world with a group of characters that I get to know very well. But I know some people crave variety more than I do. And you can break it up a little bit. You could pick out a short story collection and read a short story in between chapters of your long book. You might alternate chapters of the novel with a nonfiction title. Or you could listen to an audiobook that's a completely different kind of book, so that when you need a break from this big world that you've been living in for a while, you can go somewhere else with different people for a short time.
The notes really help with that too, because you can put down the book, come back, look at your notes, remember what's going on, and then jump back in.
So those are my tips for tackling Whopper novels. I put a list of some of my favorites in the show notes in case you want to take on a nice long story.
Nice.
Visit strongsenseofplace.com/library for more on the books we talked about today and my favorite doorstoppers that are well worth investing your time.
Thanks for joining us in the Library of Lost Time. Remember to visit your local library and your independent bookstore to lose some time yourself.
Stay curious. We'll talk to you soon.